What exactly do archaeologists do? I mean, do they run from giant stones rolling in a cave? Do they dodge snakes? You know, do they run from the bad guys? I've taught archaeology for about 14 years or so, and when I first taught it, I would teach my students that archaeology is not like that. But now, having been involved in archaeology for several years, I got to say that some of it is not quite exactly that, but there is some great similarity. But today we have an exciting guest. We're going to be talking to an actual archaeologist who has been in the field for quite a few years, and she has field experience. And we're going to be talking to her today on the next episode of Monocle and Spade. Hope you can join us. All right, well, welcome back to Monocle and Spade, the podcast of epic archaeology, where we explore the world of the Bible and beyond through the lens of history and archaeology. And I'm very excited today to have my guest, Abigail Leavitt. Abigail is a friend, and I first met her quite a few years ago, actually in Israel on a dig. We were excavating at a site about 9 miles north of Jerusalem called Khirbet el-Maqatir, and I met Abigail. And her name is Abigail Leavitt, and she is currently actually a doctoral student in archaeology. But before that, she has quite a lot of field experience in actually doing archaeology in the field. And so we're really excited to have you today, Abigail, to join us to talk about the nuts and bolts of archaeology and what it is and what your experiences have been and what you're doing now. So thank you so much for joining us with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me. This is going to be fun.
Great. And you are currently in the wonderful country of Israel right now, correct?
I am in Israel. I'm here, like you said, working on my PhD at Ariel University.
Fantastic. And we were just talking earlier, and it's so sad. You were telling me that you were excavating for you were in the field for about 3 weeks, and today was your first day off. And what do? You go to the beach. That's what archaeologists. That's what it's all about, right, Abigail?
Hey, the Mediterranean Sea is right here handy. What can I say?
Yeah, you can't beat it. That is awesome. So you just mentioned it a minute ago, but so for our listeners who may not know, a lot about you, where are you from, and where are you? You just mentioned a minute ago that you're at Ariel University, but tell us a little bit more about yourself and where you are currently enrolled in school.
Yeah, so I'm from the United States, from Idaho, and I've been doing archaeology for a long time and finally decided that I needed to go to school and get the degree. So I went to college a little later in life. I did the bachelor's, the master's, both in the US. And then since it's biblical archaeology that I'm interested in, I decided that the thing to do would be to do my PhD here in Israel. And so I was able to get in at Ariel University. It's about an hour north of Jerusalem, kind of centrally located in the country. So it's just the perfect place, perfect headquarters to be staying here and doing my research. And I can go to sites and do whatever I need. It's all very convenient and handy, and I'm really enjoying it.
That is fantastic, and I'm really excited. And I knew that you were working on your doctorate. I knew that you were over in Israel, but I one of the things that I learned recently is that you are at Ariel University, and that's really cool to me. Other people might not know that, but there is actually a professor there. And I was going to ask you, I'm just now asking you, I didn't even ask you this before. Have you had Professor Jonathan Adler for a professor?
I actually have not officially, but I did sit in on one of his classes. He's a great archaeologist, great guy. I really in the late period pottery, and he just went through every time period, every form. It was amazing.
That is awesome. Well, I may bug you later about, because I really would love to have him on the podcast to discuss his new book,
Okay.
The Origins of Ancient Judaism. Have you seen that new book that just came out?
I haven't seen it yet. I've heard him talking about it, so I've heard the conversation, but I haven't seen the book yet.
Yeah, he primarily focuses, I think, on Second Temple Judaism, as you said, and chalk stone vessels, and really
Mhm.
the archaeology of Second Temple Judaism and the origins of Judaism as it's practiced today. It's a really fascinating discussion, which we'll get into later. But that's really cool that you are
Mhm.
now attending at Ariel University, where he teaches. So
Yeah.
so right now we were talking earlier that you are currently, or at least in the last couple of weeks, the last few weeks,
Mhm.
you have been excavating. Tell us a little bit about where you guys have been excavating. What is the significance of the site? Just in a kind of a thumbnail sketch of what you're doing.
Sure. So I spent 2 weeks excavating. It's actually my advisor's site, so like I didn't have a choice, but I would have gone anyway. But since he's my advisor, I had to
Yeah,
be there.
exactly.
So this is a site in the Jordan Valley. It's an Iron Age fortress, Iron Age 2. So this is the period of the divided kingdom, Judah and Israel, and it's right on the border. So the question is it a Judahite site or an Israelite site? And that's
Interesting.
one of the things we're trying to figure out. But it's a fortress. There's a spring there, so it's probably guarding the water supply, but also it is on that border. So it's a fascinating site. It'll be interesting to learn more as we research what we found.
Absolutely. And do you know off the top of your head? I'm not sure maybe you guys have talked about it. Has the site been excavated before, and who excavated there, if anybody?
So Adams Artell did a survey of the region and he found the site. But I don't think he excavated there. I think he just found it in the survey and noted what he found. And so this excavation, and it's actually a collaboration between my advisor David Ben Shlomo and
Mhm.
Ralph Hawkins, who's in the United States, and they're working at this site together.
That's fantastic. And what is the name of the site? The Arabic name? The
It's
tell. Is it a
Khirbet.
tell? Oh, it's
It's a
Khirbet. Okay.
Khirbet. Yeah, Khirbet Auja El Foka.
El Foca. And
Yeah.
I know this, but because you are a great teacher, because I've seen you in action at Khirbet el-Maqatir teaching students. For our listeners, tell us the difference between a Khirbet and a tell, if there is a difference. I think there is a difference.
I think there is a difference, although not always.
Yeah.
So theoretically, a Khirbet is a ruin it's usually like one period. It's just like on flat ground, there are ruins sitting there. A tell is a mound. It's an artificial mound. It's built up over time, layers upon layers of occupational periods surrounded by a city wall that helps like raise it up. And so usually a tell is a mound and a Khirbet is flat. Now, sometimes there are sites that are named tell something or another and they're flat, and sometimes there are sites that are named Khirbet something or another but they're actually a tell, so it gets
Exactly.
confusing. But
Not to
there is a rule
confuse
for this.
anyone.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
great. Perhaps one of the most famous Khirbets is Khirbet Qumran, which is near the Dead Sea,
Mm-hmm.
where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, or at least near there. That's very, very helpful distinction. But you're right. There's in theory what the difference is, and then there's in actuality what things are named. So just out of curiosity, you and I have not really gotten a chance to speak because we've been in a professional context. But I've always been curious. When did you first become interested in archaeology or in biblical archaeology?
So a long time ago, when I was a kid, we had this video that was put out by Associates for Biblical Research, and it was about the excavations at Khirbet el-Maqatir. And it was one of those things, like I watched the video, I thought, that's cool. I want to do that when I grow up. But, I kind of forgot about it, right? And then I came to Israel on a tour. It was actually like a volunteer work trip slash tour.
Mhm.
And we stopped in Jerusalem at the Temple Mount Sifting Project, and they let groups come and, sift for a couple of hours through material that they have there. And that was when I really got hooked. And I was like, oh, I like this. I need to come back and do more.
Exactly. I love it. It's
So that's where
fantastic.
it started.
So when I first met you, this was in 2014, if my memory is correct, and we were at Khirbet el-Maqatir, which is near the West Bank city of Ramallah. It's sort of
Mhm.
in contested territory. It is a fascinating site. When did you? Now, this was my first time of being at the site, but you had been there for a couple of seasons, several seasons before. When did you first get involved at Khirbet el-Maqatir?
My first year there was 2010.
Okay.
And so I dug there from 2010 until 2016 when the excavation ended.
Okay, very cool. And you went as a dig volunteer with ABR?
Yeah, so I started as a volunteer, and I kept coming back. So they started training me in more of the stuff that the staff do, and eventually I became the objects registrar and then a square supervisor. And yeah,
They put you.
I just
That's just like Scott to put you to work. I mean, he's such a
right.
slave. He's such a slave driver.
Oh yeah, but I mean, I was just like I was happy to learn new things and do as much as I could. So I was having fun with it.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Now, was Dr. Scott Stripling the director when you came on in 2010, or was Bryant Wood still?
No, so Bryant Wood was the director. I don't remember, it was either in 2013 or 14 that Scott Stripling took over as the dig director.
Okay.
So it kind of changed hands partway through.
So when I was there, I was assistant square supervisor with at Gary Byers Square. We were excavating in Square Q10 along the Canaanite Wall, and the rest of the team was in the new, in the late Hellenistic period. Which is really great. We had a lot of students that year, but I remember when we kind of took a tour of the site, and I think Gary and Scott were showing us around the site. We went to a really fascinating area. And for those of you who are not familiar with Khirbet el-Maqatir, our team, I'm also a member of ABR, Associates of Biblical Research, as well as Abigail. And we believe that it is very likely, if not this very site of the biblical site of Ai, that Joshua and the Israelites destroyed in the late Bronze Age. But in addition to the Canaanite fortress, there's also a village, I guess, the best way to describe it, in the Second Temple period. So the time right that straddles the time of Christ, that there's mikvah, baths and ritual purity type pools that you can, that we found at the site. But then Scott took us to an underground olive press. And in the olive press, there is it's sort of a cave, and there were some artifacts in the cave. And Abigail, Scott told us the story about this, but the very Abigail archaeologist, Laura Croft Tomb Raider that we're talking to today, she actually crawled into this very tiny opening inside the cave. And Abigail, tell us this. I'm just dying to know the background of and what you discovered inside of this cave that you have to crawl on your elbows to get inside.
Yeah, so I was actually my first year as a square supervisor, and
Wow.
we knew that there were several mikvot in that area, and they were underground. And so I was assigned to excavate it. So we excavated down the stairs, removing the dirt, clearing more and more stairs. And finally, yeah, we pulled a rock and there was an opening into darkness. And we were like, okay, this is the mikveh down in here. And so we crawled in. There was me and I think two others that crawled in with flashlights. And it was huge. It was not a mikveh. And there were tunnels leading off in different directions. And I was like,
Wow.
okay, yeah, this is something else. So what it turned out, we excavated it actually, I think for 2 or 3 seasons. And it turned out that, like you said, it was an olive pressed cave. It was a nice, cool place to press olives, right? But then when the first Jewish revolt happened, they turned it into a hiding system. The Romans were coming. Basically, the Romans were saying, surrender or we'll kill you all, something like this.
Mm-hmm.
The people of this site chose to fight. And what they did is they hid their women and children in this cave, and we actually found bones of women and children. And we assumed that the men went off and fought. And of course, the Romans won. The Romans found their way into the cave, killed everybody, smashed everything up. So it's, really the scene of a massive murder or war crime or something that just was forgotten after that, and nobody knew about it until we discovered it that year.
Wow. So when you went in with your flashlight, you're in this really dark cave, you and the other people, and I had to crawl in there. Now, when I went in 2014, it was empty, but when you went in initially in this little side cave, did you immediately see the bones when you came in?
No, there were no bones visible. When we first explored, we didn't know that there were any bones because a lot of dirt had sifted in through there was an entrance from the top that we didn't even know about at that point because it had filled up to the top in that area. And so dirt had covered everything. We didn't
Gotcha.
find bones until we excavated.
So the bones were found in the excavation.
Yeah.
Now, did I remember correctly? I'm not sure if you said this or Scott said it, that when the bones were recovered, were there Roman arrowheads in the bones as well in the bodies?
I don't think there were in the bodies, but I think we found some in the cave. I
Okay.
think, and then we found the sandal tacks, like the type that the Roman soldiers used on their sandals for tread. So
Ah,
there was pretty good evidence that the Romans had been in there. The soldiers had
wow.
been in there. Yeah.
Fascinating, fascinating. So you can now say that you are literally a tomb raider.
Pretty much. I mean, it wasn't a tomb. That's
I
when we
know.
started finding bones. We had this moral dilemma. It's like, okay, is this a burial that we should not disturb? And we realized, no, it's not a burial. These people were never buried. And so
Mhm.
we dug them up. We had the bones analyzed, and then what we did is we gave the bones to the nearby Jewish community, and they had a big funeral and buried them. And they have a monument there. You can go visit it. And they were really pleased for the opportunity to properly bury their ancestors. So it was a big deal for them.
Wow, that is so cool. So when you were there at Khirbet el-Maqatir, and then perhaps even before that, maybe you could tell us. I just want to. I'd love for you to just sort of for our listeners. You have served as a square supervisor. This is so an archaeological site is a lot sort of like I think of it sort of as a military type of operation in which you have a general and lieutenants, and you have the workers, the grunts in the doing the work. And the square supervisor is
Mhm.
sort of like a lieutenant or an officer who sort of oversees the larger, the smaller squares, and make sure that the excavation is being properly recorded, because archaeology is a
Mhm.
destructive science. But maybe if you could elaborate on that a little bit further, explain what a square supervisor does, because you have been one for many years now. You're
Mhm.
now the assistant director at Tell Shiloh. Did I get that right? Assistant director.
Yeah, that's right.
And so tell us first, number one, what does a square supervisor do, and what is an average day at a dig? So give us, like, what time do we wake up? If people are out there listening who would love to go on a dig, you don't really have to have an experience. You can go and we'll teach you everything. So kind of give us the pitch. What's an average day like?
Yeah, so the square is kind of like you said, the smaller unit of team. I mean, we have the whole big team working at the site, but then it's divided up into the smaller teams with a square supervisor, and then several people, volunteers working. And so the square supervisor's job is to supervise the excavation of their square. It's a 5 by 5 meter area. That's the boundaries, the limitations. So you're going to supervise. You're going to teach the volunteers what to do. You're going to make sure they're doing it right. You're going to record everything that's found. Everything has to be properly recorded, and you're going to keep an eye out, because these people are digging, but they don't necessarily know what they're looking for, especially if it's their first time. And so
Hmm.
the square supervisor has to watch and see, okay, there's a rock, and then there's two more rocks next to it. Oh, we might be coming down on the top of a wall. So, we don't want to pull those rocks out. We want to leave them in case they're part of a wall. So part of the square supervisor's job is to, watch for things that are coming to light, that the volunteers might not recognize. So a day. So we get up, I think breakfast is at 4 or 4:30.
Yeah.
It's an early morning, but it's okay, because especially if you're coming from the United States, you're jet lagged, you're confused about what time of day it is anyway, so it's okay. um, so you get up early, have breakfast, you get on the bus and head out to the site, and you arrive at the site as the sun's coming up. And especially at Shiloh, it's really nice because you're walking across the Tell in the morning and watching the sun rise over the hills. Just a really, really nice moment. So you go to your square, you go get your tools from where they're stored, and you pitch your shade tent because it's summertime and it's hot.
Hmm.
And then you start digging. And so depending on the area, depends on what you're going to do, because some areas, if we know that it's a more modern, just fill or a field or something, we might use big picks and just move dirt fast. But then when we get into more archaeological context, and we don't want to miss anything, we move to hand tools. And so we're digging. And at Shiloh, we have a 3-step process. So we start by digging, and we're removing dirt, like baskets full of dirt, and we're dry sifting it. So a wooden tray with a mesh, and we're putting the dirt in and shaking it to make all of the loose dirt fall through. And then we're looking at what's left in the tray to see if we missed something. And then we take what's left in the tray and we do one more step. We take it to our wet sifting station and we spray it all down with water to wash the dirt off of those little things that just look like little rocks. And it's amazing the things that are hidden in the dirt that once we wash the water off, we find all kinds of little things, little bead scarabs, sometimes really important finds that we would have missed without the wet sifting. So that's kind of our 3-step process. We also have a metal detector that is constantly metal detecting our areas to make sure we don't miss metal finds. So we're, it's just digging. It's hard work, but it's fun because you find things. We find pottery, lots and lots of broken pieces of pottery is the main thing that we find, but then we find all kinds of other things. We find coins, tools, weapons, just, all kinds of stuff. It's always fun. And then every now and then you find something really cool. But you never know when that's going to happen. So we have lunch at the site and then dig for a few more hours, and then we quit and we have to wash all the pottery that we found. So yes, we all wash dishes, but it's ancient dishes, so it's fun. And then we head back to the hotel, and the volunteers get the rest of the day off and they can go explore Jerusalem or take a nap, whatever they want to do. The staff usually has to work in the afternoon too, and catch up on paperwork and everything.
The pottery reading. That's always fun.
Yes. So at Shiloh, we're doing pottery reading on the site during the excavation. And so, it's all the pottery from the day before. It's been washed, it dried overnight, and then we spread it out on a table and we look and see what we found. And we have the experts who look at it and they know, because pottery changes over time, like just the form of it. If you look at maybe your grandma's dishes, they might be different than the ones that you buy out of the store today. So pottery changes over time, and so there are experts who study this and they know exactly what they're looking at, and so they can tell you what time each little dates to, especially the ones that are rims. Those are the ones that are the best for dating. And so pottery reading every day.
That's it's one of the less glamorous things, but it's very essential in processing the artifacts. Abigail, you are assistant director now at Tell Shiloh, and just out of curiosity, how long? I know it's been maybe 4 years, or has it been 5? How long has ABR been excavating at Shiloh?
So we started in 2017, but we've only had 4 seasons so far because we had to take a couple of years off because of the coronavirus.
Yes. And I think, if my memory serves me correctly, that Israel Finkelstein has excavated there before. Is that correct?
Yes, he excavated there in the 1980s. And there was also a Danish team that excavated at Shiloh in the 1920s. We've actually had, they started in 1922. So last year was the 100th anniversary of excavations at Shiloh.
Oh, wow. That's really cool. So, So when the Danish excavated there, and then later in the 80s when Finkelstein excavated there, what were some of the things that they found? Was there anything significant? What did they, what were some of their conclusions? Did they say anything about the site, what its use was, or what's the thumbnail sketch?
Yeah, so they pretty well agreed that it was a site that was founded in the Middle Bronze Age, the Canaanite period. So it's a big fortified city, big massive walls with a row of storerooms built up inside the walls. And then there's later occupation too. It was occupied in the Iron Age. This is the Israelite period. And then later during the Second Temple period, Roman period, and then Byzantine. So it starts to be commemorated in the Byzantine period. So there's a city there, but also Byzantine churches commemorating the site as ancient Shiloh. So it had a long occupation history. And both of the previous excavations found evidence of all of these layers. So they're pretty well agreed that these are the periods that the site was occupied.
Awesome. So for as Old Testament history goes, this would have been the site where the Israelites, as they came out of the wilderness during the time of Joshua, where the tribal allotments happened, and also where they erected, I guess, a semi-permanent tabernacle. Is that correct?
Right. So you read the Bible, the book of Joshua especially, and you see that this is where they gather, they do the tribal allotments, and then they set up the tabernacle here. And it was at Shiloh for a long time, because later we in the book of Samuel, we see that Eli, the son. So we know that it was here for a long time. You mentioned semi-permanent, which is in a good term, I think. So when you read the Bible, you don't really get a sense that the tabernacle was anything other than the tent that it was in the wilderness.
Yeah.
But there's a little bit of terminology that's interesting because I don't remember the reference right offhand, but it talks about Eli leaning on the doorposts. And this is actually the word for like actual constructed doorposts. So we kind of get a little bit of a hint that they could have built some kind of building. And then there's a reference in a much later Jewish source. So we don't know, whether it's accurate or not, but it says that they built stone walls and then pitched a tent roof over it. So it could be a memory of something that's true, or it could be something that they just made up later. We don't know. But it leaves us with the possibility that there could have been some kind of structure that was the tabernacle at Shiloh.
Interesting. And so you were mentioning that you guys have only been able to excavate for 4 years because of the COVID. But so far, is there any indication of where that structure may have been? Is it too early?
So there have been a lot of theories, but nobody up to this point has found anything. So the main theories are that it would have either been on the very summit of the Tell, or that it was on the flat area to the north, or on the flat area to the south. And all of those are viable options, but nobody's found any evidence in any of those places. So we've been excavating on the northern slopes of the Tell. That's our area that we're working on. And we found what we're calling a monumental structure from the Iron Age. Very big building, too big to be a private home. And the interesting thing about it is that it's aligned facing east, and the division of the rooms is that there's one that's 2/3 of the length, and then one that's 1/3, which is a square, so it matches the width. And those are the proportions of the tabernacle and the temple. So it's just, we're not saying that it's the tabernacle because we haven't excavated it enough to know, for sure what it is. But it's very interesting that it's oriented the direction that the tabernacle is supposed to be, that it's got the proportions of the tabernacle structure. And then one other thing that's interesting is that if you go straight out, what would be the front of it, and to the edge of the Tell, there's a big pile of bones that was found there.
Wow.
So that's kind of cool.
That was literally going to be my next question, is that you guys, I know that Stephen Rudd has published this a couple of places, but animal bone middens or animal middens.
Yeah, so Israel Finkelstein actually found this bone deposit, and he thought that it was from a sacrificial system. He thought it was probably from a Canaanite temple, not the Israelite tabernacle, but it does have all of the sacrificial animals, the cows, the sheep, and the goats, and nothing that wouldn't qualify as a sacrificial animal. So it's really interesting.
Very cool. So basically all kosher bones in essence.
Yes, all kosher bones.
That is very cool. So so far, what are some of the highlights? I know a couple of them, and maybe you could speak to these. But we already mentioned the fact that we have a monumental structure. We're not calling it yet the tabernacle, but it could be. But we don't really know. We don't really have enough evidence yet. But what are some of the other interesting discoveries? I know Tim Lopez made one a couple of years ago. What did he find?
Okay, so he found a ceramic pomegranate, and it was actually right next to the monumental structure. And it's we see the pomegranate motif in the descriptions of the tabernacle and the temple. So if you remember, the priest's robes had pomegranates and bells hanging from it. When Solomon decorated the temple, he decorated it with pomegranates. So we know that it's a Jewish religious motif. And then similar items have been found actually at a Levitical city, and it was part of a cultic or religious a stand, like an incense stand. So it seems to be something that is definitely related to Israelite religion. So it's a very cool find, and especially finding it right next to the monumental structure. Yeah, that was one of our more important finds, I think.
That's really cool. That is really, really cool. So do you have a favorite artifact or discovery so far that you guys have uncovered there at Shiloh?
Oh, that's hard to say.
I know.
Yeah. There's so we found a lot of scarabs. They're the little amulets, or not amulets, but seals carved on the belly with some kind of design. And we found one of Tutmosis III, who was a pretty important pharaoh. And so that's probably one of my favorite scarabs anyway. Um, it dates to, well, the late Bronze Age, which is one of my favorite periods, and so really cool find. I think that might be one of my
So
favorites.
this is kind of a follow-up. It's not really on the questions that I sent you, but it is sort of related to the thing. You worked and you have experience as processing objects at a site. So typically, when we excavate squares at a site in Israel or in the Levant, we process the pottery, and then of course the pottery is read. But Abigail, speak for a minute about the importance of objects and how objects also help us to identify diagnostically and also chronologically how we can help us to really pinpoint a time, or at least give it a pretty good, like scarabs. You mentioned scarabs. What are some other objects, and what is their significance for helping us to date the different stratum?
Yeah, so I mean, pottery is the main thing that we use for dating, but you're right, scarabs can help us date, especially if they have the name of a particular pharaoh. Then we can correlate it with Egyptian history. When you get into the later periods, of course, coins are really nice because a lot of those have the actual date on them. So coins are really good. But we find a lot of small objects that maybe on their own seem insignificant, but for example, recently one of our supervisors, Boyd Sievers, might know him.
Yes.
He got the objects list from me. He asked me, "Can I have the objects list?" And he went through it, and he pulled all of the warfare items from the Roman period, all the sling stones, all the arrowheads. He pulled it all together, and he was able to reconstruct a battle during the Jewish revolt of from what direction the Romans came, how the attack went, how long it took. He even discovered that we had artifacts that we didn't even realize were related to that. And he was able to pull it all together and reconstruct this battle just based on all the small finds.
Just based on objects that were discovered. That is so cool. That is great. So are there any, you guys are going to be going back in, is it May of this year, here in a couple of months? Yep, and so May. Are there any burning questions that you guys hope to answer on this year's excavation?
Yeah, so we're going to focus a lot on our monumental structure. We're really excited about that. We want to reach the floor level to see what we find there. And then we have in this big city wall from the Bronze Age, we have what seems to be an opening and maybe a tower. We're hoping that it's a city gate because nobody's. So we're really interested to see what we find there. We want to keep excavating there. And then we want to do some more work in the bone deposit and see what we find there because, like I said, it was already excavated, but there's more area that we can excavate, and we can send bones for testing, get carbon-14 dates, and that will be really instructive for us.
Fantastic. I'm excited about getting down on the floor of the monumental structure. I'm sure you guys are going to find some really cool stuff, and the fact that you have a 3-part process, and you're going to wet sift that stuff. There's no telling what you're going to find. I'm really excited.
I know it's going to be exciting, I think.
That is awesome. So are you going to do your doctoral dissertation on Shiloh, or you have something else, or is it too early? Are you still formulating that right now?
So I do have my topic. It's on the transition from the late Bronze to the early Iron Age in the Central Hills of Israel. So Shiloh is definitely one of my sites. I have a bunch of other sites as well that I will compare. But Shiloh is a big one for me.
Fantastic. And there's plenty of stuff there for you to work on.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Which is great.
Yeah, I've got a lot to go on.
So here, I got a couple of final questions for you. These are, and I get some, I'll do podcasts and people ask me these questions and I'm like, why are you asking me? This is a hard question, but now I'm going to ask it to you. Do you have what in your opinion is one of the most interesting sites in Israel? Do you have a site that you think is really interesting that you really have not excavated, or maybe you have, and maybe it's the one you're at now? I don't know.
That's a really hard question. Personally, right now, I'm really interested in a site called Tapua, which has been partially excavated, but no real report has come out yet. And I really want to visit it. I'm trying to figure out exactly where it is so I can go. And it's not a particularly important site, but it is one that relates to my PhD. So right now, like that's the one that's at the top of my mind because I just don't know enough about it yet. But
Exactly.
it's certainly not one of the big amazing sites that you could come visit in Israel. There's plenty of those as well.
Exactly. When I'm working on a project now in Eastern Turkey, and a couple of years ago I was in Istanbul, and I had the great privilege of having a couple of lunches with who's now retired professor of archaeology at Istanbul University, Dr. Oktay Belli. And I asked him the same question over lunch, and I was like, "What, Dr. Belli? What do you think is the most interesting site in Turkey?" Without hesitation, hands down, he said Göbekli Tepe, which I don't know if you know what that is. It's a really mysterious site that was excavated by the Germans, Klaus Schmidt. It is definitely a fascinating site. But the thing is, there's so much more to be learned from the ground, and there's still sites to be excavated, and even sites that have been excavated for years, they still have secrets that are waiting to be discovered.
Yeah, and I mean, in the past, a lot of archaeologists have focused on the big sites, the amazing sites, and those are cool. They, all kinds of amazing things. But I'm starting to think about all the little sites that might tell us more about like daily life, like just farm people and settlement patterns. And I think there's a lot to learn from just the little sites that nobody really wants to bother with.
Absolutely. So you are this coming up in a couple of months, you're going to be going back to Shiloh, and you're going to be digging there. There'll be a lot of volunteers. For those listening in the podcast, those who have never been on an archaeological, maybe you've been to Israel or maybe you haven't, but you've always wanted to go on a dig, and it's like, well, I don't have the time to get a degree in archaeology. Abigail, what would you tell someone out there listening who would love to go on an archaeological dig? Do they have to know everything there is to know about archaeology, or can they just come and you will teach them everything they need to know?
They can come. We will teach them. We take volunteers who have no prior experience, no prior knowledge. They should sign up. Go to Dig Shiloh if you want to come to Shiloh. I think we're almost full for this year. I'm not sure if there's any spaces yet left, but sign up for next year if you can't come this year.
Fantastic. That is so awesome. And is there now? Do you have a website or a blog that you can that people can read more about your adventures? I think you do, and we will actually put it in the link. Yes. But tell us what that blog is.
Yes, so I have a blog. It's Abigail's Archaeological Adventures. I think it's .wordpress.com or something like that. I should have this memorized. And yeah, it's for my family and friends and anybody else who wants to read it. And I just write about what I'm doing over here, so people can follow along and see what I'm doing and learn more about sites over here in Israel.
Fantastic. Well, Abigail, thank you so much for coming on Monocle and Spade and talking about the fascinating science of archaeology and the process of excavation and the process of getting stuff out of the ground. And there's always more to discover. And I pray that we get to dig together again. I may be going back to Turkey, but I've been really itching to get back to Israel and get back with the ABR team. I saw you, I think, November, we were at ETS and you were presenting there. Yeah. So my plan is, the goal is I'm going to be moving to Texas later this year, and I'm tentatively planning on giving a paper at the NEAS.
Great. Then I'll see you there.
So yes, absolutely. But thank you so much again for coming on Monocle and Spade. It's great to have you.
Oh, thank you. I enjoyed it. This was great.
Thank you so much. And thank you guys for listening to Monocle and Spade. Please hit subscribe. And if you're watching this on YouTube, hit subscribe on the YouTube channel and hit the bell to get notifications. Thank you so much for listening. Keep digging for truth, guys. God bless. Take care.